Welcome back to our ProCaaSo trial site series. In this video, you will learn about visual element images, visual element definitions, types of visual element flares, and how to add a new visual element in ProCaaSo. Visual elements are the images that are associated with components from a system definition. Visual elements are not required for every component. If you wish to have a component with no visual element, you may configure to do so by adding this line to your component in your system definition. Component type hidden. Otherwise, the component is defaulted to have a visual element. Visual elements consist of two essential parts: a visual representation, which is the actual image of the visual element rendered as an SVG file, and a definition file, which is a YAML formatted file that outlines a visual element's capabilities similar to a system definition. The visual representation of a visual element is an image stored in the SVG file format. You can create your SVG images using any SVG compatible design tool. When creating SVG images, it's important to crop the final image to remove any unnecessary space around the visual. Extra space increases the overall size of the visual element, which can affect its presentation and scaling. We can adjust the size of the visual within the system definition, which will be demonstrated later in this video. Every visual element also has a definition file, which is a YAML formatted file that outlines the visual element's capabilities, which again is very similar to a system definition. The visual definition file has 4 requirements: a name, description, size, and flares. The name field is simply what you decide to name your visual element. The description field will represent a brief description for your visual element. The size field will define the size of your visual element in pixels. And lastly, flares are additional stylistic features that you can add onto your visual element. Let's go more in depth about the flare attribute. Every flare will need its own name. Every flare has further attributes defined depending on what type of flare it is. There are 4 different flare types: label flares, bar flares, port anchor flares, and Boolean indicator flares. Label flares are versatile and can be simply used to label a component or to display data. We utilize their prefix and suffix properties to help specify units. For example, if we wanted to display the humidity value from our environmental sensor with a % symbol, we can assign a suffix with % so that the data pooled has units. To display data, we may further configure our system definition to pass that particular data to the event bus and pull it to our visual elements. For more details on this, check out the ProCaaSo trial site tutorial series, specifically the video on data transfer and system definition. A bar flare corresponds to a fillable bar which can be positioned as either horizontal or vertical. A port anchor corresponds to the visual placement point of a port. These port anchors are typically used when a component has ports and need to be connected using connectors. The heading field allows you to align the port on the right, left, top, or bottom of the visual. The flow field defines whether the port is an inlet or an outlet. And lastly, we have a Boolean indicator, which provides a visual indication for a Boolean value. You are able to assign the color of the true and false indicator as a string as long as it follows CSS format. Here is an example visual element that includes all of the supported flare types. Let's start with the name and description. The name is example visual element, and the description explains that this visual element demonstrates all of the available flare types. Next, we have the size parameter, which is set to null. This means that the size will be the original file size, but this can be flexible depending on the system definition. Now, let's look at the flare section. The first flare that we have is called name label. This is a label type flare, and the text displayed by the default is env sensor placed at the coordinate 0, 0. meaning that this will be placed at the very center of the SVG image. The background color is transparent and the text is in black and is in a medium size. The flare does not use a prefix or suffix for its text, making it simple and direct. The second flare we have is called temperature PV. This is another label flare representing a temperature value. The default value is 0 and it's placed slightly above the center at x equals 0 and y equals -30. The text color is also black and is also at a size medium. The default value that is 0 is dynamic and can be updated with values from the event bus. A degree symbol, Celsius, is added as a suffix to denote that this is a temperature value. Next, we have our third flare, which is humidity PV. Similar to the temperature flare, this label displays the humidity value. The default value is also 0 and is placed below the center at x equals 0 and y equals 30. Like the previous flare, the text color is also black at a medium size and the suffix is %. Our fourth flare is a port flare example. This flare represents a port anchor, which indicates a connection point. It's placed near the top of the visual at x equals 0 and y equals -10, with a top heading and an outlet flow direction. Our fifth flare is an example of a Boolean indicator flare, which is used to show a true or false state visually. It's positioned at x equals 25 and y equals -25, and its color changes based on the Boolean value, which is fed through the event bus. When the value is true, the indicator turns green, and when it is false, it turns red. Lastly, we have our sixth flare, which is an example of a bar flare, represents a vertical bar with a maximum value of 100. The bar is placed at x equals -160 and y equals -40, and is oriented vertically, giving a sense of progress or measurement in that direction. In this case, it will be representing the % humidity of the environmental sensor. You can stream values from the event bus to all of the flares, with the exception of the port anchor flare type. For more details on this, check out the ProCaaSo trial site tutorial series, specifically the video on data transfer and system definitions. Keep in mind that this is just an example, and you can add as many flares to a visual element as you need. Now, let's add a new visual element to ProCaaSo. Head to the Projects tab and select the project that you would like to edit. For this example, we will be using the trial site follow-along project. Click Open Project, then click on Edit. This will take you to the project editor. At the top of the project editor, select Add Visual Element. Then, in the pop-up window, select the plus button to create a new element. Now, you may add the definition file that you would like to use by selecting Pick File. Then, you can upload the corresponding image in an SVG format. Lastly, you are required to give your visual element a title and description. Now that all of the fields are complete, you are able to add the visual element to the visual element library by selecting Add. Your visual element should now appear in the visual element library. The visual element provides a baseline definition for the elements and its flares, which allows for reusability. If you need to further customize the visual element and add more flares, or adjust the size for your specific system, you can easily do so within the system definition. That concludes this video on how to create a visual element in ProCaaSo. Thanks for watching!